here and it's jam-packed, so I'm just going to keep pressing on. You guys can catch up with me. But Genesis 1:26 through, I think, 28 here. Yeah. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, and the birds of the heavens, and every living thing that moves on the earth." We're going to have some mature content today, but I know with absolute certainty that the quote unquote other side of these issues, nobody is going to shield you or protect you from their own thoughts and ideas. And this is so absolutely crucial for us today. So please just try to track with me and be mature, as I know that you are, to discuss these things. But what did these verses teach us about our identity? Who are we according to these verses by virtue of the way that God has made us? This passage teaches us that there is no person who exists that is not first and foremost a creature of God, knit together in their mother's womb. Psalm 139 says that we are fearfully, wonderfully made, that God sees our unformed being, that he knows us before we're even born, that we're made with dignity. And this passage here teaches us specifically that we are made in the image and likeness of the living God. No human being has ever lived who is not the image of God, who does not have dignity as a human being because they are the image of God, and who will not live forever because they are the image of God. The Bible tells us from the very beginning we get our identity from God. God tells us who we are and that we are special, that we are more important. We are made differently from the other lower animals. They were spoken into existence by God's word. God just commanded, and the animals just simply were. They popped into existence out of nothing. We are different. We are image bearers. The Bible teaches us that we were created righteous. There's no righteous monkeys running around. The Bible teaches us that we know God in a special way, right? Cats do not have a knowledge of God except by virtue of the fact that they always obey his decree and commands, but there's no like personal knowledge there. There's no fellowship that a cat has with God. We are ethical creatures. We have a conscience, right? I can train my dog to respond to food. He likes milk bones, so I can, if he's not wanting to come in from the yard, I can lure him with food, but he's still operating on instinct. The dog is not capable of sin. He's not capable of evil or anything like that. But we as human beings are. And that's what sets us apart from these other lower animals. And also, we read specifically that in these verses, our maleness and our femaleness are explicitly a central part of the way in which we are like God. That gender is part of the image of God. Not that God is either male or female, but that collectively human beings, as existing, as belonging to one of two gendered categories, this is not just for Spanish class, right? Is this noun masculine or feminine? But that male and femaleness in human beings is part of the image of God. You can't be a human without being gendered. Your body and your gender have a purpose from God. You don't need to be released from your body to achieve some sort of authentic selfhood or real personhood that goes beyond that. But you will get a new resurrection body on the last day, and that body will also be a male or female body. I could give you lots of examples from the history of philosophy. I won't because of time, but if you kind of go down through the history of human thought, especially unbelieving human thought in rebellion against God, rebellion against the gospel, trying to set ourselves up as our own gods, our own standard of reality and identity, there's this idea that comes up again and again and again in Gnosticism, in all kinds of false religions like Scientology, and it goes on and on and on. But the idea is that somehow you know, the body, physical matter, material, like the stuff of this world is somehow lesser, somehow dirty, somehow the cause of evil or sin or some such thing, and that your real self, your real identity, your soul, your personhood comes from sort of the immaterial, the non-physical. Right? There's this idea that, as humans continue to, maybe in a sci-fi show, as we continue to evolve, we'll eventually shed the need for our physical bodies and just become these pure energy beings, right? Well, what's the idea behind that? It's the idea that all of this physical exterior stuff outside of us is not only not that important, but maybe actually weak or dirty, and that your inner subjective self is what really matters. And so if we imagine that there's a possibility that your body and your soul actually might not agree about who you are, that there could be some mismatch there, where they don't align, that your body says that maybe you are one way and your soul says that you're another way, that the soul should win. That your body is irrelevant to determining your identity. That is at the core of transgender ideology, and it's nothing new. Every single example that I could bring up, there is a denial of the connection between your body and your soul, and there is simultaneously a demotion or a denigration of the body. The body's not important. Your feelings are what really matter. The non-physical part of you is what really matters. The problem is that, of course, how you feel just isn't who you are. How you feel changes on a day-to-day, but it's still you that is having those feelings. Your identity, yourself, does not change with your feelings. But modern people think that it does. The Bible teaches us that we are not a soul trapped in a body that needs to be set free to somehow be fully human. The Bible also doesn't teach us that we are only a body and that our soul is like a manifestation of stuff that's happening in our brain. No, the Bible teaches that we are whole people with a body and a soul, and that both are important and matter, right? Think about it. What happens when you take the soul out of a body? What do you call that remaining body after the soul has left the body? What does Jesus in older translations, when he's on the cross, it says that he gave up the ghost, or he yielded up his spirit? What does that mean? He died. Yeah. When the soul leaves the body, when you yield up your spirit, when the soul and the body are separated, the result is death. There's a corpse. It's not normal. The person ceases to be living. Right? So that is not the normal state of human beings. God made Adam's body out of the dust of the earth with his hands. So does he doesn't have hands, but he formed Adam from the dust of the ground, uniquely among all the animals. And then he breathed his own life into Adam, unlike any of the other animals. Jesus took on a human body and a reasonable human soul. It's not as though the second person of the Trinity comes down and possesses a body that otherwise was not living, right? It's not just Jesus' soul was a real human soul, not just God sort of replacing the soul of a, well, I can't even say person, because that implies a soul, right? Try not to get too sidetracked by that. You get really complicated Trinitarian theology. Ask your pastor later. But Jesus had a real human soul, right? The Bible clearly teaches that. Jesus was raised in a resurrection human body that could eat and do all of the normal things that human bodies do, and also some additional cool stuff that we can't normally do. But it was a real human body, and the first fruits of the real glorified human bodies that we will have when we are raised from the dead. The body is important, and the body matters. Bodies as gendered are important, and they matter. God created human beings, male and female. Why? This passage goes on to talk about the way that God blesses them, and he says, be fruitful and multiply. The maleness and the femaleness is immediately directed towards marriage, and more specifically towards procreation. That, other animals, maybe there's fungi that kind of bud off, or certain animals that clone themselves and are exact replicas, but human beings reproduce through sexual union of males and females, and that is part of God's plan and part of God's intention in creating us that way. It's not random, it's not an accident. God specifically says in Ephesians that marriage is a metaphor for Christ and the church, that the gospel of our salvation and belonging, body and soul, as a whole church to Christ, our Savior, and that union and that profound intimacy that's there through our salvation is what marriage is meant to be a object lesson and picture and metaphor for. So that when our culture goes to war against Genesis 1 and 2, we are actually going to war against the gospel, the core of the message of redemption of the Bible. The Bible says that God gets to tell you who you are. The transgender agenda says that you get to determine who you are. What's the problem with that? All self-identification. Anytime that we disagree with God about who we are, what does the Bible call that? Sin. It's sin. It's rebellion. Adam and Eve in the garden, the next chapter from where we read, chapter 3. God doesn't know what he's doing. Has God really said, will you really die? Well, we don't know. We have to take matters into our own hands. We have to determine our own destiny. We have to define right and wrong for ourselves. Maybe God was wrong. Maybe he didn't know what he was talking about. That's the definition of sin. All sin is self-determination, and ultimately all self-determination, all disregarding God, is sin. This isn't about compassion. This is about truth and the desire to control reality, to make our own reality without considering what God has said. But the Bible tells us again and again that our thoughts and feelings are not trustworthy. Jeremiah 17. The heart is desperately wicked and not to be trusted. Who can understand it? Isaiah 26. But trust in the Lord and not in man. You know, if you kind of probe some of the things that we are being taught and that are being fed to us through the media and social media and the politicians and the way that things are in the schools right now, you very quickly realize that it's a house of cards. Every anti-biblical ideology ultimately has to be self-defeating. You can't build a coherent worldview on lies. You can't get rid of God and have a worldview that sort of works and hangs together. And so we should expect this kind of inconsistency. We should really be on the lookout for it. But here's just a few ways in which this whole edifice, this whole house of cards kind of comes crumbling down if you just poke it just a little bit. Have you noticed that there is no other area of our culture or our identities where our culture would say that feelings get to dictate over biology? There's no other area of life where people would say that, well, your body and who you are on the outside doesn't really matter. It only matters how you feel. That's what they say for gender, but that's not what they say for anything else. And so there's a fundamental inconsistency there. Let me show you what I mean. I don't know if you remember a few years back, there was a sort of a big stink about a woman named Rachel Dolezal. And the problem was she was supposedly a black person, right? And she was just acting, publicly presenting as an African-American woman. And people were like, well, I mean, you're kind of light-skinned, like what's going on here? And they dug a little bit into her past and they're like, no, this is a white woman, right? This is a Caucasian woman pretending to be black. And people got really upset. This is cultural appropriation. This is unacceptable. Well, according to trans ideology, why not? If she identifies as an African-American woman, isn't that what really matters? Right? She feels like she's black, so why is that a problem? Why shouldn't we just let her feel like she's black? If she says she's black, she is black. Right? If you feel like a woman, you are a woman. If you feel like a man, you are a man. If you feel like you're black, you are black. Why is one okay and not the other? Why can't I identify as 7 feet tall? Right? Why can't I identify as a better basketball? Don't have an athletic bone in my body. I've played precisely one game of basketball in my life, and I retired when they started blocking me. Right? Why can't I insist that the NBA should pay me to be the starting point guard for the Lakers because I am the greatest I identify as the best basketball player in the world, and I'm 7 feet tall. That's my soul, my inner, that's my truth. Why doesn't that work? Why can't I do that? Why? Let me get a little bit more serious. Why is anorexia a mental disorder and not just a person who identifies as obese? That's what they feel like on the inside. That person who's struggling with anorexia feels like their soul identifies as an obese person, and therefore they need to continue to lose weight. How about body integrity dysmorphic disorder? That's a mental disorder where you feel like you are supposed to be handicapped. Like you want to be an amputee or something like that. That your body, you are a handicapped person trapped in an able body. And so therefore the only way to relieve this pressure and this inconsistency and this psychological pain between the disconnect between your identified inner self and your body is that you need to find a doctor who will amputate your perfectly healthy legs. Or even in some instances, you will self-amputate. Why is that considered mutilation and gender reassignment surgery is not? It's only when it comes to gender that our culture says this. Nowhere else. That the soul is correct and the body has to be wrong. And the only way to fix the pain of a quote-unquote man trapped in a woman's body or vice versa is to change the appearance of the body through dangerous hormones and surgeries, and that any cautious voices need to be silenced. Of course, you can't actually change a male body into a female body or vice versa. You can change the way that it looks on the outside. You can have prosthetics and you can have surgeries and hormones to change some of the details, facial hair, the width of the hips, things like that. But ultimately, every cell in your body at the level of your DNA is biologically sexed, male or female, XX or XY. Because the root of the problem is not actually the body, it's the whole person. But our culture says that we're not allowed to talk about that, that we can't even admit that actually these young people who struggle with what used to be called gender dysmorphic disorder or gender identity disorder, people who are struggling with feeling like they are not the gender that they actually are, that usually people who have these confused thoughts, if you just let it run its course without encouraging it artificially along the way, does anybody here know how many of those people, those young people, desist, that they stop identifying as transsexual in any way, and it resolves in the direction of their normal biology? The statistics vary depending on which study you look at, but it's 80 to 95%. If you don't artificially come in and push them in that direction and encourage them to live out this fantasy, 80 to 95% of young people who struggle with this, it will go away and it will be just a phase, and they will go on to live normal, healthy lives as the gender that they actually are. But no, if you even mention that, if you express in our culture anything other than affirming the delusions, you are going to be branded as transphobic. You are going to be treated as if you are the moral equivalent of a slaveholder in the 1800s or a concentration camp guard in Hitler's SS. That is the moral equivalent that has been drawn in our culture. Kids are being told today in Washington that if they think that they might be trans, that anyone who disagrees with them, anyone who even voices, caution, hey, slow down, let's think about this for a little, that those people actually hate them, even if it's their own parents. And this is reinforced by our laws, by all of the cultural power, imposing that we bend the knee to a very specific and very recent and very dangerous agenda. This kind of thing is being normalized in kids' shows. I have 3 young boys. They're beautiful, and you know what? This kind of stuff shows up in Blue's Clues. This kind of stuff shows up in Pete the Cat. This kind of stuff shows up in Buzz Lightyear and in the ads on YouTube Kids. I can't let my sons watch TV on their own without being right there over their shoulder to change things at a moment's notice. I have to watch like a hawk because this stuff is out there and is being shoved down their throats to normalize and desensitize. Children can be taken away from their parents by child services if those parents are not, quote unquote, affirming. To suggest that maybe gender dysphoria is actually a grave mental illness that requires not surgery but therapy is literally illegal in 7 states right now. So we have all of these not therapists, but gender therapists, gender clinics that are popping up all over the United States and Europe and Canada. The problem is that gender therapists have a hammer and nail problem, right? The saying that if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. So it might be a screw, but all you've got is a hammer, so you're going to knock it instead of screwing it down with a screwdriver because you don't have a screwdriver. If all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And that's sort of the problem with these gender clinics. They're going to see surgical remedies and medical intervention under every rock and as the only solution because that's the only tool they have. And the problem is they also have the political clout to enforce those positions. And anyone who says otherwise is silenced and shut out and branded as fringe. Medical professionals, caregivers, teachers are required by law in many places to encourage and cheer on children who are just beginning to learn about the differences between men and women so that they would persist in this confusion. These kids actually need help. Now, I agree with the transgender activists that the suicide rate among transgender children is 19 times higher than in the surrounding population, and that is horrible. Where we disagree is about the cause of that discrepancy in that statistic. See, they will tell you, oh, they're 19 times more likely to kill themselves because you're rejecting them, because you're not affirming, because they have all this pain, and if you would just accept them, then they wouldn't try to kill themselves. And actually, if you don't affirm your child who is trans, then you basically want them to be dead because you're encouraging them to go and commit suicide. It couldn't possibly be that the underlying trauma that caused them to be broken in this particular way has something to do with it. That there is some third thing that is causing both. Or that perhaps the trauma of transition itself is contributing to that statistic. Right? What's the age range in here? What's the group I've got today? 10th through college. Okay. So here in Washington, you guys are almost all under 21 in this room, right? So, and several of you are under 18. So, right? You can't drive. You can't vote. You can't buy tobacco. You can't buy alcohol. You can't buy a gun. You can't get married. You can't have consensual sex. You can't join the military. Why? Why do we have laws to prevent all of those things? Because we have recognized as a society that you are not mature enough or responsible enough. The frontal cortex of your brain is still developing until you're 25. The hippocampus, the decision-making centers, are physically not developed. And therefore, there are dangers to these things which you may not fully understand in order to make a decision to engage in those things or not. And yet, the same young people who can't do all of these very normal things are now being told that they can decide that they have a specific and serious medical condition and to demand a particular life-altering treatment, and the only response from every adult in the room is we have to cheer that on as heroic. That's not heroic, it's demonic. Think about this with me. Those of you who are old enough, which I think is most of you, why is it that 10, even maybe 5 years ago, trans was not really a thing that you ever heard of anywhere? It just wasn't a thing. Or when it did come up, right? Like cross-dressing was a joke. Like in 90s sitcoms, oh, ha, that man is wearing a dress, that's funny, right? Or maybe in other contexts, it was a weird sexual perversion. Why is it that in other cultures outside of this Western rich bubble, it's unheard of? But now all of a sudden, it's everywhere, only in rich Western cultures, Europe and North America. People with lots of money and lots of free time. There are some surveys going on right now that say that up to 20% of Gen Z now identifies at some point as LGBTQ+. I can't keep up with the acronym. That is not normal. Why is that the case, and why is it the case now in this generation, not in previous generations? It's because children, minors, young people are suggestible. That means that if you put an idea in someone's head, they are likely to run with it, especially if it's an idea that makes them feel empowered. It's a social contagion. This stuff is popular right now, right? Think about it. If you tell a kid that their sex and their gender are whatever they want them to be, and that they can change on a whim, and that there are no consequences to any of this. And if they decide, by the way, to identify as something other than male or female, they will be supported and called brave, and they'll get extra attention and deference from the adults and the authority figures in their life, and they will be celebrated, and they see this in their favorite TikTok influencers and their cartoon shows emulating this behavior and promoting it. And also, by the way, nobody, including the traditional authority figures in their life, is allowed to question you. What did you expect to happen? It's self-fulfilling. And once you start down this path of presenting publicly and then going further and further steps, it is just so much harder to stop that train. It's so dangerous. You used to have to at least be 18 to begin to have some of these therapies, but that is long out the window now. This is being pushed on younger and younger and younger children. I have my oldest is going to be 5 at the end of the year. Got a 3-year-old next month, 8 months old. Kids will sometimes tell adults that they're a pirate, right? Or a T-Rex. Judah's favorite. Really likes to be a T-Rex. According to the logic of this trans agenda, if a kid says that they're a pirate and insists they're a pirate, and that goes on for some time, weeks, months, that we should be required by law to schedule those children for prosthetic peg leg and eye removal. Right? My boys will insist, and that's the criteria, right? Is it insistent? Is it persistent? Is it consistent? Well, then it must be true. That's their identity. Well, my boys insist on eating ice cream every day and never going to bed. And I don't let them do that. I don't let them be the boss of themselves in that way, because as their father, it would be profoundly unloving for me to allow them to do something that's ultimately unhealthy for them. It is completely, there is one thing about growing up in this culture or any culture that is completely normal. And that is, as a preteen or a teenager, you are supposed to feel uncomfortable in your body some or most of the time, right? How many of you, even if you have never had a thought remotely in the direction of anything interested or anything to do with this trans stuff, have ever wondered growing up in high school and middle school why you couldn't fit in or be at the top of the social food chain? How many of you wish that you could have been more attractive or have bigger muscles or be taller, right? In high school, I was the pre-transformation Steve Rogers, all right? I am a buck 35 soaking wet, okay? Right? I don't have, and I'm not naturally athletic. I'm not aggressive. I'm a pretty conflict averse person. But you can imagine how such a person today, if there's someone who comes along that doesn't care about you but has their own agenda, their axe to grind, they might exploit that confusion to promote, hey, maybe you're really a girl. I'm Scottish. I could pull off a kilt. I'm pretty pasty, so you might not like it. But, right, that's one small jump to a skirt, right? You should at least explore that. You should see if that fits, if that feels good. Brothers and sisters, you are being targeted by cultural forces, and you think, oh, well, this is just for kids and middle schoolers. I mean, Bruce Jenner transitioned in his 60s. Oh, I grew up in the church. I would never. No, church kids are not immune to this cult. You are being targeted by cultural forces that have an agenda that hates God and hates the gospel, and they want to re-educate you and brainwash you. For some of you, if you're still in high school, it might be time to get out of the public schools. It might be time to cut social media out of your life entirely, 100%. I can't speak for you. I can't speak for your parent, but that might be something you. If you're going off to college, you need to think long and hard about the indoctrination program that you are about to enter into, depending on where you're going. The Bible tells us that sin, right, to determine truth, to determine our identity, to determine what is good for ourselves apart from God, always has a disintegrating, destructive effect. So this should not surprise us or be strange. Sin makes us less fully human, not more. Now, that's not to say that there's a one-to-one correspondence between any one specific sinful act and like, oh, God is punishing you. But rather that because we are all sinners in general, this world is now under God's curse. And therefore, by extension, all mental illness, all imperfection, all disorder, including identity disorders, are ultimately caused not by God's design, not as something natural, not as something good, but caused by sin and are fundamentally unnatural and disordered. So is gender identity, is it a social construct? Is it something that we made up? Or is it real? Are there only two genders or are there more? I think last I checked, there was one school in the UK that listed like something like 34 options. You can be male or female or asexual or bisexual or pansexual or two-soul person, or I can't keep them all straight. Is gender something that's assigned at birth by a doctor? Is it arbitrary? Yeah, we'll make this one male, check that box. Or is it objective? We said that your gender is coded into your DNA, that it has to do with specifically reproduction, right? Can't rewrite biology to support your ideology, your agenda. Now, it's true that a very small proportion of the population is intersex. Intersex people exist. The Bible recognizes that. Matthew 19 Jesus talks about people who are born eunuchs. The idea that there's some kind of there's an abnormality, a malfunction, a dysfunction in the normal sexual maturity process, so that some people will not be able to perform those sexual reproductive functions in the normal way. That doesn't mean that they qualify for some third category that we need to now recognize as being normal. No, intersex people are related to very specific and medically recognizable mutations at the DNA level. They're either XXY or they're missing a part of a chromosome or something. And these diseases have names, and we can define them and map out the prognosis and so forth. Well, okay, maybe that's, the physical, but what about self-perception? Can we have more than one gender at the level of my self-perception, my presentation, right? Maybe that's different. Well, then we have to ask the deeper question, do we actually value matching up what is objectively and externally true to our own subjective inner self-thought? Do you actually care about truth and reality? Because as a Christian, you should, right? Do not bear false witness. Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father but through him. We should care about truth, but our culture now says, no, reality is whatever you want it to be. You get to make it up as you go along. Every person gets to live in their own fantasy world and define reality for themselves, and nobody else gets to say anything about it. Your reality is whatever you say it is. And that's actually real. And so now we have chest-feeding men, and men can be pregnant too. Because why? Because they say that they are men. They have defined reality for ourselves. And we all have to say, that's not just his truth. That's not just true for him. That's just true, period, full stop. That's where our culture is right now. They are literally changing the definitions of things in the dictionary to follow this ideology. The world has clearly made its choice on this question. Are we going to allow changing feelings to determine reality? The most recent Supreme Court justice was chosen specifically because she's a woman. Biden promised to nominate a woman, and he did. Feel however you want about that. I have no problem with that. When asked if she could define what a woman is, because after all, she was chosen because she is a woman, she said, no, I can't tell you what a woman is because I'm not a biologist. How absurd is that? To borrow from, I think it's from his recent documentary, although I haven't watched the whole thing, but Matt Walsh and his documentary, What is a Woman? Speaking to some woman, he says, well, men don't get to tell women what they are. Only a woman who's lived experiences as a woman, only a woman can determine what a woman is. So he says, okay, well, do you identify as a cat? Tell me what a cat is. This person just walks away. It says, I've made a genuine mistake, and walks away. Gender is fundamentally, immediately related to procreation and biology. There is no confusion about this in the animal kingdom. Male and female animals of the same species have size differences, coloring differences, right? Peacocks are very bright and flashy, and they have all the different colors. Peahens are smaller, and they're brown and boring, right? It's usually the males in nature that are very flashy, and the women are very brown and drab. I don't know. That's just the way God designed them. We go the opposite way. Men's suits, black, gray. Women's like all the colors. I don't know. Okay, no. But even in the world of like animals, right? Seahorses, right? The male seahorses carry the babies. So obviously, the difference is not so hard and fast in nature, right? No, that's not a counterexample either. Because the male seahorses may carry the babies in the pouch, but they don't produce the seahorse egg cells. They don't switch roles in that way. They don't actually gestate them. The only thing that's happening is they literally just carry them around after they've been fertilized. There is no marine biologist who will tell you that they are interchangeable, or that the biologist is confused about which one is the male seahorse and the female seahorse. Bringing it back to human babies, why do we have gender reveal parties? Why is it that you can look on an ultrasound of a 12-week-old baby in the womb and say, that's a baby boy or that's a baby girl? They're not going to be born for, what's the math? They're not going to be born for 28 more weeks, but we already know whether that's a boy or a girl in the womb. Gender is not assigned at birth, it's recognized. There are differences beyond just, physical parts in your groin, bone density, average size, average strength. Take examples from the military. Take the most physical fit woman that Ronda Rousey, right? Just the most physically fit woman, female that you can imagine. And now we've changed the laws so women can be in combat roles. They can apply for every military school out there. They can try to go to ranger school, infantry officers, whatever. It's all open to them. Spec ops. Why is it that no woman has ever passed infantry officer school? Why is it that no woman has ever passed special operations qualifications courses? Why is it that to even get them into the lower level, this is not any to cast aspersions on women. It's just a biological reality of the average size and strength and muscle mass of men and women. I, as a very slim, slender, weak, physically unimpressive man, can easily pass all of the lowered standards that women need to pass for physical fitness in the military. Easily. Because you have to lower the bar to get them in, because just on average, even Ronda Rousey cannot put on a 120-pound pack and walk through the desert for 10 miles. Why is it that, I don't know what his name used to be, but Leah Thomas, the swimmer at Penn, why is he breaking records in the women's league when he was a mediocre swimmer as a male? Now, the Bible is not demanding gender stereotypes. It's not saying that, well, to be biblical, you have to go back to the 1950s and leave it to Beaver, and women should just be housewives who are there to serve their husbands and be servants and never work or anything like that, right? Look at the Bible, right? Jacob and Esau. Esau is a man's man. He's out there. He's hairy. He's hunting. He smells like wild game. Jacob is soft. He loves his mom. He's not hairy. He likes music and poetry. He's sitting in the tent. He likes to cook. He has soft hands. So what? Does that mean that Jacob is actually a woman? No. He's Esau's brother, not Esau's sister. 150 years ago, pink was a boy's color. 50 years ago, there was not this whole pink-blue thing that we do with babies when they come out of the hospital. Those things are social. They do change. But ironically, we're living at this moment where we've become so obsessed with this straitjacket of this gender has to be this and this has to be that, and we segregate the toys. And, if you like to play with the toys of the other gender, the toy companies did that. The Bible didn't do that. Now, it's true that there's trends, right? Mostly, for the most part, little boys don't like playing with Barbies. But, so what if they do? We've caused our own problem that we're then rebelling against. Bruce Jenner used to be an elite athlete. He won the triathlon gold in 76 in the Montreal Olympics. Broke some records, I think. Why is it that his version of being a woman that he decided to do in his 60s, he's not out there breaking stereotypes. He's not out there being Caitlyn Jenner CEO, breaking the glass ceiling. He's not out there, doing the Hillary Clinton pantsuit thing. No, he's posing on the cover of Vogue as a pinup girl with lots of makeup. Why is that? Why is it that our culture says, well, I feel the opposite of my sex because I do, or I want to do X, and therefore, and only boys or only girls do that, therefore I must be a boy or a girl. Who's actually doing the stereotyping in that instance? Why is it that our pop stars trend more and more towards androgyny than previous generations? How much are you at the same time, not you like sitting here, but just people in general, the people that do this, how much are they pushing the very same agenda in order to say that bodies don't matter, but also reinforcing the stereotypes that they claim to be taking objection against? Make no mistake, this is an attack on family. It's an attack on creation. It's a rejection of God's goodness. It's a rejection of his wisdom. And ultimately, it's taking the easy way out. How's that? Think about this. Instead of, hey, here's a person who is deeply confused at a very fundamental level. Maybe we need to wrestle with the deep-rooted spiritual brokenness and trauma and frequently abuse that has happened here that got us to this point. No, that sounds hard. Let's just fix it with surgery. Even though that surgery rarely solves anything, sometimes it makes it worse. You can go out there, you can find stories of detransitioners. Surgery didn't fix it. It made it worse. Or I wanted to go back. It didn't help me find the fulfillment that I was looking for. They didn't tell me that I had to go back and have multiple surgeries again and again and again every few years. They didn't tell me that I had to be on the medicine for the rest of my life. They didn't tell me about the side effects. They told me it was harmless. They told me it was reversible. It's not. I have fundamentally mutilated and broken my body, and I have to live with those consequences for the rest of my life. But they don't tell you that because it doesn't suit the line, suit the agenda. Brothers and sisters, we live in a cursed world, and the Christian life involves learning how to do things that are difficult. The gospel is that we would recognize that we cannot achieve human flourishing. We cannot achieve the life that we are designed for, the life that we desire, until we surrender to God's will for history and for our lives. And if we try to flourish apart from God, we will be utterly lost till we give up that vain effort. His design is best. When he said he created Adam and Eve and it was very good, he meant it. Now, I'm not saying, right? I think most of you will have at least had contact with someone who at some point wrestles with this stuff. Statistically, that borne out. I know a few people who have gone pretty far down this path. How do we respond to these people? They need love. They need the gospel. You wouldn't tell any other kind of sinner they need to repent first before you would share the gospel with them. You wouldn't expect them to clean up their life, and so we shouldn't expect people who are caught in the trap of this trans agenda to change and totally clean up their life before we will have any contact with them or love them. All people should be free from violence and harassment. Should never endorse that. We need to recognize that these are people who have been and are continuing to hurt in profound ways. But the one thing we cannot allow them to continue checked in a harmful and destructive way. Go and love them and talk about how Jesus fixes broken things. When people reject God in the last days, the Bible promises that He will give them up to strong delusion. Stand firm that listening to God's word is the only way to be fully human and to flourish, and that we find a fellowship with God, and that male or female Jesus. That's the gospel. It's the one thing that this whole apparatus hates to hear, but that's that's basically what the Bible has to say about this topic. That was an awkward end. Questions? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think there's a lot of different ways that that could play out. I'll give maybe a separate example. What would you do if there was a company that required you to work on Sundays as a condition of the job? You couldn't go to church. Would you keep the Sabbath and find a different job, or would you work for that company and say, okay, I guess I have no choices? Um, it is not yet true that every single job out there is, for one of these super woke cutting edge companies. Um, there are still sane jobs to be had. So it's really going to depend. It might mean a demotion. It might mean a less lucrative job. But when you are faithful to the Lord, He will honor that and He will take care of you, right? Psalm 34, I have never seen the righteous forsaken or their children begging for bread. God's going to get you a job one way or another. But we have to make those tough choices, and we have to be willing to sacrifice. Now, if it comes down to like, okay, I'm in this job already, and here's this coworker who really has a preferred pronoun issue, that's less cut and dry, right? You have to wrestle with that in your own conscience. Am I being complicit in a lie by calling them this, or is it maybe something that I can avoid being unnecessarily offensive, right? The gospel itself is offensive enough. I don't need to add offense to that. I can be gentle. That's probably a question that you have to wrestle with in your own conscience. And it might be different for each individual depending on how aggressive they are about it. Um, but I'm not here to pretend that this is all going to be easy or that there's like a cut and copy paste solution to it. There's not. But we need firm on what we stand for, but also gentle in the ultimately decide in your own heart what is sin and yeah. Um, more seminars like this, super important. Um, I think even with some of the sexual abuse stuff, uh, churches need to get out in front of it and have clearly defined policies for how they will handle these things evenly, so that it's not sort of piecemeal and ad hoc and being reactive rather than responsive. Um, really need to emphasize you're in ministry, knowing the sheep. Um, church used to be a very all-encompassing and mutually reinforcing community. Church used to be your social network, and now it's just one little compartment, one part of it, to the point where the bonds, fellowship, are weakened, and a lot of this external influence is allowed to creep in. So, um, I think long term, generationally, we need to think about rebuilding parallel culture. Um, you know, Christian schools, uh, super important today more than ever. I think the pandemic sort of pushed a lot of people into like, hey, homeschooling actually kind of works. Um, I think that's a big start, right? I think definitely cutting off some of the avenues, especially for younger people who are not yet, you want to kind of positively brainwash young people with the gospel before the world gets their clutches in them. Um, you know, train them to respond to these wolves. I think the public school system is a well-oiled machine that will continue to chew up and spit out our children. Stop letting them. I am more and more convinced of that. I know that's not an option for a lot of people, but I think COVID kind of exposed like, hey, no, like this actually can work for a lot of parents. I think that's one option. At the individual local church level, I think we really have to know people more deeply, almost intrusively. Got to be a little bit nosy and get involved in people's lives in more and multiple different ways so that they have a deep, rich, multifaceted community. And I think counseling more than just right SFC we're reformed. We heavily on the ordinary means of grace, but there are informal ordinary means of grace like counseling and that need to happen a lot more. Pastors need, or they need to outsource, or something has to change. Bible study is not enough. I can't, but I can point you in resources in that direction. Um, even if you just to get the ball rolling, just a couple of books off the top of my head that at least help us to think about these things. Some of it will be redundant because I used some. Can't get them on Amazon because they're banned as quick. But Ryan T. Anderson has a really good natural law take on things. His book, When Harry Became Sally. I don't remember the publisher. I think it's 2017. Ryan T. Sally. Nancy Pearcey, Love Thy Body is a really good one. Um, CCEF, Christian Counseling Education Fund out in Philadelphia, has really good counselors. And the people out there can probably point you in the direction of local counselors, trust, if you want to outsourcing in where they, yeah, 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 sure, right. So could you give me a specific example of where you Bible address? Okay. Yeah. So the word of the Lord stands forever, right? The word of the Lord, there is no shadow of changing. The Lord does not change. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. When Jesus is tempted by Satan, what does he say? He appeals to that ancient document, Deuteronomy, and he says, "Thus saith the Lord." And he quotes a document that is 2,000 years older than he is as an authority because it is the word of God. So no, is the short answer to that. Yeah, if you want to give like a specific example, I could be more detailed. But no, the word of the Lord stands forever. The grass fadeth, but the word stands forever. Yeah, that's okay. Sure. Right. Sure. Sure. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. That this is that. Yeah, it's natural. Right. So male brains in both lower animals and in are very, we'll say, virile, right? Actually, the root there is even man, right? The Latin word for man is vir. So, right, my dog went before he got fixed would pretty much hump anything, right? Um, that does not that particular piece of data is not a logical defeater to the truth that there is a general categorical difference between maleness and femaleness. And the fact that a dolphin may find a particular, he sticks a part of himself somewhere and he derives pleasure from that, regardless of where that is not a productive union in the way that reproduction and creating more. No new dolphins are being born from that. That's not furthering the species. So I don't think that you can logically draw a conclusion from that particular behavior to these sweeping kind of things that we want to draw from it. Or over time. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Sure. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Um, we are told to be salt and light in a dark world. So your corporate powwow is probably not the time to be very disruptive and to kind of push back. But yeah, you can say, I identify as a woman. My pronouns are she, her, and you can look for other opportunities. If there's someone there may not be anybody at your company that transgresses those things. By the way, trans and transgender, again, the Latin, right? Trans just means to go over or to cross a boundary, right? To go to the other side. So um, maybe there's nobody that is transgressing sort of gender norms in your company, but by standing firm on like, no, I am. I wouldn't want to use the word cis because that's sort of playing into the hands of the sociologists on this. But yeah, no, I'm a woman and I was born this way and by this way. And if there was a particular situation that came up, yeah, you should absolutely try to avail yourself of that. God is not gonna, send you to hell because you didn't convert that person, but we wanna be salt and light, make the most of dark time. It's gonna get worse before it gets better, and it getting better means Jesus came back, so we should expect that. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. I can close this off in prayer real quick as we go up to dinner. So let us bow our heads. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for just giving us the space to discuss these potentially heavy topics of gender identity, Lord. And as we just navigate our way through the day and just our lives in general, just give us wisdom, oh God, to just move accordingly to the Bible and what the Scripture says. Oh God, let us be strong in our faith and what we are confident in, which is every word that you give to us, oh God. Thank you for blessing us with the seminar, and thank you for giving us Pastor Rob to talk about these things. Be with us throughout the rest of the day, and just bless us as we finish out the day here at SFC. So we love you and thank you. I pray all this in Jesus Christ's name. Amen.